Shabbat Shalom, Israel. I just wanted to kind of go over and make a part two of what we spoke about last Shabbat in Ezekiel 37. Just to give a quick brush up, if you'll recall, we talked about Ezekiel 37 and the events that were happening. We talked about how the Christian world was mistaken in its interpretation of the Ezekiel 37 prophecy. We talked about how the 1948 incursion of the Ashkenazi Jews is mistakenly applied by many Christians as the fulfillment of the Ezekiel 37 prophecy. But any historian, even a layperson, because I'm not a historian, I'm not an archaeologist, but any layperson is going to be able to look at history, look at who the people are and who the people are not, and be able to discern that that was not the truth. That is not a fulfillment of the Ezekiel 37 prophecy. We talked about how the Ezekiel 37 prophecy was specifically for the actual children of Israel. We talked about how it was a picture of the coming of Yahushua, whom most people call Jesus. The coming of Yahushua and the resurrection of the saints. This is specifically talking of the children of Israel. This is what we discussed last week. Okay. And I want to go back a little bit where scripture says in Ezekiel 36 verse 26, I'm going to give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you, and I shall take the heart of stone out of your flesh, and I'm going to give you a heart of flesh. So I just wanted to put that out there to point out the relationship aspect of this renewal, of this restoration. Okay, it's not just going to be putting us back in the land, but it's making us a new people, giving us a new heart, so that the very thought of going against the Most High Yah would sicken us. Okay, so that's kind of what we spoke of last week. And I wanted to point this one thing out. I wanted to point out something because which is kind of why I'm doing a part two. The things that were said last week was in no way meant to be exclusionary to other races, colors, creeds, because Christ said in was it Ephesians chapter 2 verse 12 that whereas before he's talking to the Gentile nations through his manservant Shaul, he says, before you were without the Most High in the world, being excluded from the commonwealth, and you didn't have salvation, but now, because of Yahushua's sacrifice, salvation is opened up to everybody, no matter what your race, color, or creed is. Okay? To kind of anchor that, what I want to do is I want us to go to Daniel chapter 2, verse 5. And I'm not gonna read the whole entire chapter. I think you guys should read that for yourself. I wanna use the example of the image, which is another point of prophecy. The image of stone that represented successive kingdoms. Okay, to point out the fact that Yah's kingdom is going to be all over the world. It's not going to be only in Israel or only in Jerusalem. Yes, that will be the headquarters for Yah's kingdom, his footstool, but it will not be limited. Yah's kingdom is not limited to just Israel, just the land of Israel, or just Mount of Olives, or just Jerusalem. Because Daniel chapter 2 verse 35, and I'm going to just point out a part of that. You guys can read the rest of it. The stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled all of the earth. So we see here Yah's kingdom fills the whole entire earth. It's not only limited to one specific location. It's all over the earth. So if you are blessed, anyone, it doesn't matter if you're Israelite or Gentile, if you're blessed to be alive during that time, during that millennial reign, during that, even after the millennium, in eternity, No matter where you are in the world, you are a part of the kingdom. You are a part of Yah's kingdom. You are living in Yah's kingdom, because at that point, that stone grew and filled all the earth. Yah's kingdom is all over the earth, right? So I wanted to point that out to kind of do away with the whole idea, the misconception that uh, this was only, that salvation is only for Israel. It's not. It's for anybody who accepts Yahushua Christ and does his commandments and follows and clings to him by keeping the commandments. Okay, so I had to point that out. And there are people, there are individuals, there are camps that do teach that salvation is only for Israel. But we've pointed out two scripts so far that says no, that's not the case. Salvation is for anybody, any and everybody who holds on to Christ, Yahushua, right? So let's move forward. That was Ezekiel chapter 37 that we spoke on. Okay, it was very clear. It says, I'm opening your graves. I'm going to bring you up from your graves. I'm going to bring you into the land of Israel. That puts to bed the idea of the saints going to heaven to live for 1,000 years. Some of us may have been trained in that direction, in that kind of thinking. I know I was. To think, oh, we go to heaven on that great day of judgment, but there's nothing that says that. Now, you could look at certain verses. You could look at First Thessalonians, I believe it's chapter 4, where it says that we'll be caught up in the clouds to meet him in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Most High. Okay, that verse I could understand why you would think heaven, but you can't make a doctrine out of one verse. Line has to be put on line, precept on precept, here a little, there a little, right? So if you couple that with Ezekiel 37, when we get caught up in the clouds, where do we go? Well, Ezekiel 37 answers that if we go back, into the prophets, right? So now that that has been said, I want to go to Ezekiel chapter 38. I want to fast forward a little bit because Ezekiel 38 is interesting to me, because what that does is it points out, it kind of paints a picture of what the start of the millennial reign is going to look like. There are a couple of prophets that point out what the millennial reign is going to look like. But since we did Ezekiel 37 last week, I just thought I'd point out chapter 38, which also gives that picture. Now, if you look at the illustration, you may see Revelation chapter 20 on there next to it, and you might be wondering, what does that have to do? What does one have to do with the other? Well, we're gonna point that out in a minute. I'm gonna show you what it has to do, line on line, precept on precept, here a little, there a little. You have two prophets who lived in two different times, but they're talking about the same event. Okay, and that is the way, when you look at the scripture through a Hebraic lens and not a Christian lens, you'll see that more readily. You'll see it that oftentimes you have all the prophets, they're talking about the same event. Yes, it's from the vantage point of whatever time they lived in, but it's the same event. You'll see that it does not, they don't contradict one another. Okay, so I want to start out with a scene. Paint for yourselves a picture with the words that I'm reading here. Ezekiel 38, and the word of the Most High Yah came to me, saying, Son of man, turn your face against Gog, the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, Tubal, and prophesy against them. And you're going to say, Thus says the Adon Yahweh, I am against you, O Gog. I'm on verse 3. Prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. I'm going to turn you around and put hooks in your jaws and lead you out with all your army, clad perfectly, a great assembly with armor and shields, all of them handling swords. Okay. Now the pronunciation in my version is a little bit different. Okay, I'm going to read it as it is. Paras, Cush, and Put are with them. Okay, so you got the Persians, you got the Cushites, which are the Ethiopians, and Put are with them. All of them with shield and helmet. So you see a picture here of wartime. Okay, Gomer and all its bands, its families, the house of Togomorrah, and so this and Togomorrah, these are the descendants of Japheth. From far north, and all its bands, many peoples with you. Prepare yourself, you and your assemblies that are assembled unto you, and you shall be a guard for them. So what the Most High Yah is saying to these nations is, I'm going to put it in your heart to come against, to be ready for war, to come against a people. I'm going to put it in your heart to come against these people. But at what time? At what time are we going to do this? Okay? That was verse 7 where I read, be ready and prepare yourself and all of your assemblies that are assembled unto you, and you shall be a guard unto them. Stop. Let's go over to Revelation chapter 20. Let's go to Revelation chapter 20, verse 7. Okay? Because I want to see how I want you to see how these two relate to each other and how they are connected one to the other. Revelation chapter 20, verse 7. Okay? And it reads, and when the 1,000 years have ended. Now keep in mind, John the Revelator, he is also painting a picture, an apocalyptic picture. Okay? And I'm only reading a part of it so that we can connect these two. But for the sake of time, that's why I'm doing it like that. But I would that everybody read the entire chapter so you can get a fuller picture. Okay? Verse 7 says, and when the 1,000 years have ended, Hasatan shall be released from his prison. And I'll do another piece at a later time to point out what that prison is. And he shall go out, verse 8, and lead the nations astray which are in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog. We heard those two names in Ezekiel 38, right? And to gather them together for battle, whose number is as the sands of the sea. And they came over, verse 9, and they came up over the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints and the coveted city. Stop. It said after the 1,000 years were ended, Hasatan would be loosed from his prison, right? Let's go back. Let's go back to Ezekiel 38 now, please. Let's pick back up with verse 8. Verse 8 reads, and this is key, after many days you shall be called up. So we have a picture with the Most High saying to these nations, I'm going to put it in your heart to want to go to war and attack a people. But when? Verse 8 says, after many days. What is that many days representing? After that 1,000-year millennial reign. After that 1,000 years is done, then you shall be called up. And it reiterates, it says, in the latter years, you shall come into the land of those who have been brought back from the sword and gathered from many people onto the mountains of Israel. So we already covered in Ezekiel 37 last week that the regathering did not happen in 1948, but it has yet to be. The regathering still has yet to be. Okay? And it's future. And it's going to be true Israel that gets regathered. At this point, we will have been regathered where? Back to Israel. We're still within the realm of time, but having been regathered back to Israel. He says, I'm going to put it in your heart to go and make war with these people that I have regathered back, is what he's telling these Gentile nations. Okay? Let's continue with verse 8. And gathered from many peoples upon the mountains of Israel, which have been a continual waste. Now we see Israel today, the Middle East over there. It's pretty much, for the most part, it's an arid, dry, rocky place. You can barely grow food. Right? It's not the most conducive for life, and that's just what it was and what it is up until the near future. But they were brought out from among the Gentiles. Keep in mind, Ezekiel 37 points out that I'm going to bring you up from your graves, resurrection day. I'm going to regather. I'm going to catch you up to the clouds, and I'm going to regather all of you. So wherever we were scattered for our disobedience, those of us who are keeping the law, statutes, and commandments, and faith in Yahushua, are regathered from among where whoever we happen to be among at the time, whether it be here in the U.S., whether it be in the UK, whether it be wherever, right? Will be regathered. Let's go to verse 9. And you shall go up like a storm, covering the land like a cloud. That sounds reminiscent to Revelation 20. Okay? Where he said, and they came up over the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp. Okay? It says you're gonna go up and you're gonna come like a storm covering the land like a cloud, you and all your bands and many people with you. Thus said the Adon Yahweh. And it's gonna be that in that day, what day? That day of battle, that day when the millennial reign is over and we are about to step into eternity, right? That words arise in your heart and you shall devise an evil plan. And you're going to say, let me go up against this land of unwalled villages. Let me go up to those that rest, who are at rest, who dwell safely, and all of them dwelling without walls, having neither bars nor gates. 12, to take plunder, to take booty, that means to take money, to take sustenance, to stretch out your hand against the waste places that are again inhabited and against a people who have been gathered back from the Gentiles and get their livestock and their goods who dwell in the middle of the land. Okay, so we're talking about the end of the 1,000-year millennial reign here. So if you look at John the Revelator's version, it's apocalyptic and it's he kind of gives a snippet, a snapshot. Whereas you look at Ezekiel, he talks about that same event, but kind of lays more out. He kind of lays it out more, right? If we go a little bit further down, no, you know what? No, let's not go further down in Revelation. I want to stay in Ezekiel because that's where we're at. 13 lists some more nations like Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish, okay, and all their young lions shall say to you, have you come to take plunder? Have you gathered your army to take booty, to bear away silver, gold? Keep in mind let's stop right there for a minute. Keep in mind at the coming of Yahushai, and at the regathering and the restoration and the being planted back in our own land, there is going to be sustenance returned to us, resources, gold, silver, dromedaries, everything is going to be returned back to us. Isaiah chapter 60 speaks of how it's almost like we're going to be babied and given all deference by other nations. Other nations, even their kings, are going to pass through Israel and give their tribute. So we'll go back to being the adorned people that the Most High Yahweh had originally intended before we misbehaved, before we apostatized. Right? Again, this is for His name's sake, not for our own. I want to skip down a little bit because again, there's the issue of time. So I want to skip down a little bit. We see 13 again talking about an attack, where the picture is continually talking about an attack and taking away livestock and goods. Because keep in mind, we've been living good for 1,000 years in peace and being rich. Now at the end of 1,000 years, Satan comes. He's released from his prison. He leads all these nations, and he says, "Hey, we can go here. We can take them." This is, by the way, at the time of the second resurrection. At the end of the 1,000 years is the second resurrection, where everyone who did not die knowing Yahushai or wanting to follow Yahushai is resurrected, and they choose the enemy. Verse 14 says, "Therefore, Son of Man, prophesy, and you shall say to Gog, Thus saith the Adon Yahweh, in that day when my people Israel dwells safely, would you not know?" This is apocalyptic because There's nobody in Israel today dwelling safely. There's turmoil over there in Israel. There's turmoil. There's war. Okay? Let's skip down a couple of verses for the interest of time. Verse 18. I want you to kind of pay close attention to verse 18. And it shall be in that day when God comes against the land of Israel. When Gog comes against the land of Israel, declares the Adon Yahweh, that my wrath will come up in my face. Let's stop right there. Let's see what he's talking about here. Let's not, well, we know what he's talking about, but let's see who else talks about the wrath coming up. John the Revelator talks about the wrath coming up. All right? Let's go back. Bear with me for a second, saints. Verse 9, 20 verse 9, and they came up over the breadth of the earth. Revelation 20 verse 9, and they came up over the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city. And guess what? Fire came down from Elohim out of heaven and consumed them. Okay? Let's read that part again in Ezekiel chapter 38 verse 18. And it shall be on that day when Gog comes against the land. Now, there are a lot of nations coming against the land of Israel in that day, but he just named that one as a representative. Declares the Adon Yahweh that my wrath shall come up in my face, for in my jealousy and in the fire of my wrath I've spoken on that day that there should be a great shaking in the land of Israel. Okay? This is kind of like the very last war. All right? Let's skip down a little bit because it's just talking about how the heaven and the earth and all the creatures are going to be shaking. Okay, so 19 down through 21 is talking about that. 22 says, and I shall judge him with pestilence and flood, and rain down flooding rain and hailstones, fire and sulfur on him and all his bands and on the many peoples who are with him. Stop. John the Revelator just pretty much gave a synopsis. He says in verse 9, I'm going to read it again, and I'm going to read a piece of it. And fire came down from Elohim out of heaven and consumed them. So we see these two prophets talking about the same event. Okay? And this is for, again, any and everybody who purposed in their heart that they would not follow Yahushai, would not have a relationship with Yahushai, and therefore a relationship with Yah. Okay? Because as we see, sin can't go on forever. So I wanted to kind of finish that off. This kind of, helps to finish off, giving a picture of this prophetic event, this apocalyptic event that's happening in the end. Right? We see how Revelation 20 gives the same picture that Ezekiel 38 gives, and we see how, yes, there is a special covenant for Israel, but it does not exclude other nations from salvation. People are going to be still living all over the earth. The earth is still, the whole earth is still going to be home to many peoples, not just Israel. Not just Israelites. Again, if you are alive in that time, in that dispensation, then you are living in the kingdom of Yah, no matter where in the world you live, because Yah's kingdom, just like that stone that grew and covered the whole entire earth, Yah's kingdom covers the whole entire earth. Okay, so I just wanted to point that out, and I hope I was pretty much clear with a lot of what I said. Hit me up with questions in the comments if there's anything that's misunderstood. I'd be glad to answer them for you. But in any case, I wish everybody a peaceful Shabbat, and we will meet again soon. Shalom.